Los Canales, Spanish for the fjords. This zone of southern Chile just south of Chiloé Island is filled not only with small land bodies, but also with mysterious legends, such as El Trauco and La Pincoya. Most of them go back in the oral tradition for generations. But there's one such legend that has been no more than a couple of decades in the cultural landscape and, some say, is still unfolding. It's the story about a strange and hermetic community of tall and fair people, even Nordic in appearance, who inhabit a secluded island of the area. Nobody seems to know who they are, where they are located exactly, or why they live there. However, there's a small group of Chileans who claim to know their secrets. They even appear to possess evidence backing such claims, over 1,000 minutes of taped conversations between amateur radio operators and people who present themselves as inhabitants of Friendship Island. In 1985, it is said that one of these conversations occurred at the exact moment of one of the most famous UFO sightings over the Chilean capital of Santiago. This convergence was the stepping stone for many ufologists and researchers to seriously consider that there is a link between the UFO phenomenon and whatever is happening on Friendship Island. But the impression that the strange behavior of the inhabitants of the island is due to extraterrestrial activity had already been around for a couple of years. In the early 80s, a group of ham radio operators from the capital Santiago established contact with the island. One such hams was Octavio Ortiz. He caught a signal that carried the voice of a man with a strange foreign accent, and they started talking regularly, late at night. It wasn't long before his new friend identified himself as an inhabitant of a previously unknown island somewhere between the fjords and archipelagos that extend for miles at the southern end of the American continent. He called himself Ariel. When he asked locals of the surrounding area about the community, they described them as a group of strange blonde priests. On August 17, 1985, the Ortiz home received a radio call in the middle of the day. The time of the call was already strange, but nothing prepared Octavio for what he was about to witness. It was his wife Claudia who answered the call this time. She also had spoken over the radio with Ariel on previous occasions, but this day was special. The man on the radio told her, "Claudia, go outside and look to the sky." She was given specific instructions on where to find the allegedly alien vessels in the sky. That conversation, which involved other radio aficionados, was actually recorded on tape by the couple. Awestruck, Octavio Ortiz was outside watching the UFOs moving in the exact same manner as Ariel described they would just a few seconds earlier, while Claudia was inside repeating what she was told. This was several minutes before the local media started reporting the sightings on live TV. This was, in fact, a particularly well-registered and spread UFO sighting in the country at the time. The case was even seriously investigated by the Chilean Official Aeronautical Office, coming to the conclusion of it being an unexplained phenomenon, meaning it can't be explained by regular causes, such as meteorological balloons, satellites or common aircrafts. Actually, the case caused such a ruckus that Octavio's conversations with Ariel at some point became allegedly under investigation by the military. It was Ariel himself that told Ortiz that they would have to cease their communications for a while, since they were being recorded. At this point, Octavio had been invited by Ariel to visit Friendship Island on several occasions. However, he always refused, since the idea raised certain apprehensions in him that he didn't completely understand. This strange feeling was due in part to certain stories he had gathered about terminally ill people being taken to the island and cured by unknown means. The same thing that spooked him at first became the very same reason why he ended up accepting the invitation. Ortiz became seriously sick, so he decided to start his journey to Friendship. He was told to travel to Quelon, one of the main towns in the large Chiloé island. Once there, he waited near the port for the ship that would take him to his final destination, a small yacht called Mitalus II. While he waited, he received a radio contact from Miguel, Spanish for Michael, who warned him about the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster. Ortiz was overwhelmed when he actually saw the shuttle explode a few minutes later on live TV. This demonstration made him change his mind about visiting the mysterious island, so he turned around and went home to deal with his illness the old way. The most comprehensive investigation regarding the Friendship Island case at the time was conducted by Spanish ufologist Joseph Gallardo. He discovered a witness that would prove to be an invaluable asset in the story, Ernesto de la Fuente, the only person who is known for certain to have visited the island. Ernesto was in fact one of the first TV hosts in the early days of locally produced Chilean television shows. He later became one of the first and most respected documentary producers. However, in the early 80s, old and sickly Ernesto became somewhat of a hermit when he decided to retire and go live on a secluded shack in the remote island of Chiloé. There he became an avid amateur radio operator, and it wasn't long before he was contacted by the Friendship Island community. Later, he started running errands for them in Chiloé's towns and ports. After 1.5 years, he eventually discovered he had cancer, and that was when he visited the island. He would later state, "I was in shock to find out that these friends I had spoken with for so long were actually aliens." His words, not ours. While Ernesto was living in Chiloé, he came to know a man named Alberto who owned a yacht, the Mitalus II. This man at some point told him he felt like he hit the jackpot because, quote, a congregation of strange priests had hired him. Later Ernesto started interrogating the workers that were being transported to and from the island in the Mitalus II. They told him that this congregation had bought an island in the south of Chile and were settling down there. The congregation called themselves Friendship. This is when Ernesto started his communications with the islanders and started running errands for them. His main job was to gather and host people that were traveling to the island, and then deliver them to the Mitalus II yacht. That's when he met these mysterious priests face to face for the first time. He would later state that they possessed a very special aura that transmitted peace and calm to everyone in their presence, and to be perceived as kind and wise. When Ernesto asked them about their wisdom, they told him, quote, "We are not wise, we just received knowledge from our Lord's angels." It was during this time that Ernesto discovered he had terminal lung cancer. When he told Friendship about this, they told him they would heal him. That's when, instead of bringing people over to the Mitalus II yacht, it was time for him to embark. He says they traveled among the intricate archipelago for hours, going around and between islands he had never seen before. Until night came, and he fell asleep. The next day they were still navigating. Finally, by around 4 p.m., they docked on the island. They took him into a small and modest building. Its interior was decorated in the style of the time, and it was quite fancy. He then entered a room that contained an elevator. Ernesto thought it was strange, since the building had no second floor. He entered and the elevator started going down, down and down. This left him in shock, because he never imagined such a facility being in a place like this. When the doors opened, he found himself in a huge and beautiful underground space, with a mild and constant temperature, pure and clean air, warm lights and all sorts of accommodations. There lived a plethora of people, women, men, children and even some elderly folks. Ernesto recognized many of them as the exact same people whom he had picked up, hosted and delivered to the Mitalus II in port. There were computer stations everywhere, way too advanced for the time, in which you could access touch screens and request information regarding the facility, such as locations, what was for dinner and whatnot. This may not seem impressive today, but remember this was the 80s. The facility's population consisted of the so-called mysterious priests, no more than 14, and over 60 more regular people. Ernesto de la Fuente said in an interview that when he asked the priests who they were and where they came from, their answer was, quote, "We are the servants of the Lord." Shortly after, he was taken to what looked like a top-of-the-line medical clinic. When attempting to explain what was done to him there, Ernesto said, quote, "It's hard for me to find the words. I know I was intervened in some manner, but I was never cut open. I stayed for 4 or 5 days in an elegant and intricate medical bed of some sort with many devices that came online from time to time, and when I was finally let out, I was healed. During the whole process I never experienced even a slight amount of pain or fear. He then stayed for 2 more days in which he was cared for diligently. When he left the island, he immediately traveled to the capital Santiago to get examined by medics. They found he wasn't sick anymore. This zone of southern Chile has a rich mythological tradition, and there have been sightings of strange things for hundreds of years. The same phenomenon that current fishermen report as UFOs have been known by different names throughout the ages. There are historical reports of fishermen encountering strange boats with very tall and blonde people in them. By connecting the information provided by witnesses, local urban legends, many ufologists, investigators and even the military, have attempted to finally find Friendship Island. However, it has never been found. That concludes our rendition of the story of Friendship Island. We hope you have enjoyed this mystery, and if you did, please hit that like button. For more content like this, remember to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.